The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Prince William stood at the window of his private study. His hands trembled slightly as he held the official document that would change everything. The royal seal gleamed in the early light, but its significance felt heavier than any crown he would ever wear. Kate entered the room quietly, her footsteps barely audible on the ancient wooden floors. She had been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of their bedroom, knowing that today would mark the beginning of the end of life as they knew it. Her usually bright eyes were rimmed with red, evidence of the sleepless night they had both endured. "The children are asking questions," she whispered, her voice barely carrying across the room. "Charlotte wanted to know why we were both crying at breakfast yesterday." William turned from the window, and, for a moment, they simply looked at each other. In that gaze, 20 years of shared memories flickered between them like pages in a photo album blown by an unseen wind. Their wedding day at Westminster Abbey, the birth of their children, countless royal engagements where they had stood side by side, presenting a united front to the world. "What do we tell them?" Kate continued, moving closer to her husband. "How do we explain that sometimes love isn't enough to keep a family together when the weight of duty becomes too much to bear?" The official document in William's hands detailed the unprecedented decision that had been months in the making. After extensive consultations with the Queen, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and senior government officials, it had been decided that William would renounce his claim to the throne. The pressure of royal life, combined with the intense media scrutiny and the impact on their children's mental health, had finally taken its toll. Kate reached out and gently touched the paper. "I keep thinking about that day at university when we first met. Do you remember? You were so worried about people only being interested in you because of your title. I told you that to me. You were just William. Not a prince, not a future king, just William." He nodded, a tear forming in the corner of his eye. "And now, because of that title, we're losing everything we built together." The irony isn't lost on me. The decision hadn't come easily. For months, they had tried everything possible to make their marriage work within the constraints of royal life. They had attended counseling sessions in secret, held long discussions late into the night, and even considered taking a sabbatical from royal duties. But the fundamental issue remained. William's destiny as the future king required sacrifices that Kate was no longer willing to make, and William was no longer willing to ask of her. The breaking point had come during their last official overseas tour. While the public saw smiling faces and perfect coordination, behind closed doors, they barely spoke to each other. The constant performance, the inability to have genuine private moments, and the relentless pressure to be perfect had created an unbridgeable chasm between them. "The children will understand one day," William said, though his voice lacked conviction. "George is already starting to ask difficult questions about what it means to be royal. Maybe this will give them the chance at a normal life that we never had." Kate wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold together the pieces of her breaking heart. "I love you, William. I want you to know that. This isn't about love failing. This is about love making an impossible choice." The sun climbed higher in the sky, and soon the palace staff would begin their daily routines. Royal protection officers would arrive for their briefings, private secretaries would present the day's schedule, and the machinery of royal life would continue as it had for centuries. But today, something fundamental would change. William carefully folded the document and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. "I've asked Harry to come by this afternoon. I need to tell him before the announcement is made public tomorrow." "How do you think he'll react?" Kate asked. "Probably with relief," William said with a bitter laugh. "He's been trying to escape this life for years. Now he'll suddenly find himself much closer to the throne than he ever wanted to be." They stood together in the study, surrounded by portraits of William's ancestors. Kings and queens who had ruled for centuries looked down upon them, their painted eyes seeming to judge this unprecedented decision. Never before in modern royal history had an heir so close to the throne voluntarily stepped aside for personal reasons. The phone on William's desk began to ring, its shrill tone cutting through the heavy silence. It was probably his private secretary, calling to confirm the final arrangements for the announcement. In less than 24 hours, the world would know that the future King of England was choosing love over duty, family over crown. But, as William reached for the phone, Kate caught his hand. "Whatever happens next," she said, her voice steady for the first time that morning, "I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Not because you're a prince, but because of the man you are underneath all of this." The phone continued to ring, insistent and demanding, like the royal duties that had ultimately driven them apart. William let it ring, holding Kate's hand tightly, knowing that these might be among their last moments together as husband and wife, as partners in both life and duty. Outside the study window, life at Windsor Castle continued as normal. Gardeners tended to the meticulously maintained grounds, tourists gathered at the gates hoping for a glimpse of royalty, and the world remained unaware that in this quiet room, a decision that would reshape the British monarchy was about to be announced. The weight of centuries of tradition pressed down upon them. But, for this moment, they were just William and Kate, two people who had loved each other deeply but found that sometimes even the deepest love cannot overcome the fundamental incompatibilities that life presents. As the morning wore on, they would have to face their children, their staff, and eventually the world. They would have to explain the unexplainable and justify the unjustifiable. But, for now, in the growing light of what might be their last morning together as a royal couple, they simply held each other and mourned the future they would never have. The afternoon arrived too quickly, bringing with it the sound of Harry's car pulling up the gravel driveway. William watched from the same window where he had stood that morning, but everything felt different now. The decision had been made, the wheels set in motion, and there was no turning back. Harry entered the study with his characteristic energy, but his smile faded immediately when he saw the expressions on his brothers' and Kate's faces. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice carrying the same concern that had been present since they were children navigating the aftermath of their mother's death. "Sit down, Harry," William said, gesturing to the leather armchair near the fireplace. "We need to talk." Kate excused herself, knowing that this conversation needed to happen between the brothers alone. As she left, she squeezed Harry's shoulder gently, a gesture that only increased his worry. "You're scaring me," Harry said, settling into the chair but perching on its edge, as if ready to spring into action. "Is someone ill? Is it Kate? The children?" William took a deep breath and pulled the document from his jacket pocket. "Harry, I'm renouncing my claim to the throne. Kate and I are separating. The announcement will be made tomorrow morning." The silence that followed was so complete that William could hear the ancient clock in the corridor marking each second. Harry's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, shock, and, finally, understanding. "William, you can't be serious," Harry said, but his voice lacked conviction. He had seen the strain on his brother's face during recent months, noticed the forced smiles at public events, observed the way William and Kate seemed to exist in separate spheres even when standing side by side. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," William replied. "This isn't a decision I've made lightly. Kate and I have been struggling for months. The pressure, the constant scrutiny, the inability to protect our children from the same trauma we experienced growing up, it's destroying us." Harry leaned back in the chair, running his hands through his hair. "Do you understand what this means? For me, for the monarchy, for everything Dad has been preparing for his entire life." "I know exactly what it means," William said. "It means you'll be heir to the throne. It means your children will face the same pressures that drove Kate and me apart. It means Dad will have to reconfigure everything he's planned for the succession." The weight of this realization hit Harry like a physical blow. He had spent years trying to find his place in the royal family, often feeling like the spare to William's heir. He had carved out a life of military service and charitable work, always knowing that his role was to support William when he became king. Now, suddenly, he was being thrust into the spotlight he had actively avoided. "What about George?" Harry asked, grasping for alternatives. "He's third in line. Couldn't we skip a generation? Let him grow up normally, and then—" "George is 8 years old," William interrupted. "I won't put this burden on him. If I step aside now, you become heir, and your children will inherit after you. At least that gives George a chance at a different life." Harry stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where he and William had played as children. "Meghan and I left royal life because we couldn't handle the pressure. How do you think we'll manage this?" "You'll manage because you'll have to," William said, his voice gentle but firm. "And because you'll learn from our mistakes. You and Meghan have already proven you can adapt, that you can find ways to make royal life work for your family." The conversation continued for over an hour, covering practical details and emotional implications. Harry asked about the children, about the custody arrangements, about how the public would react. William answered each question with the patience of someone who had already wrestled with these issues for months. When Kate returned, The brothers were sitting in silence, both staring at the fire that had been lit against the afternoon chill. She carried a tea service, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what they were discussing. "Have you told him everything?" she asked, setting the tray on the coffee table. William nodded. "Harry, I know this puts you in an impossible position, but I need you to understand. We've tried everything. Counseling, reducing our official duties, spending more time away from London. Nothing worked because the fundamental problem isn't something we can solve. It's something we have to escape from." Harry looked at Kate, seeing clearly for the first time the toll that royal life had taken on her. She had always seemed so composed in public, so perfectly suited for royal duties. But now he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders carried tension, the careful way she measured even her movements in this private setting. "What will you do?" Harry asked her. "Where will you go?" "I'll stay at Amer Hall with the children for now," Kate replied. "William will take Clarence's house. We want to keep things as stable as possible for George, Charlotte, and Louis while we figure out the long-term arrangements." "And you're sure about this?" "Both of you," Harry pressed. Kate and William exchanged a look that spoke volumes about the hours of discussion that had led to this moment. "We've reached the point where staying together would damage us more than being apart," Kate said. "We still love each other, Harry. We probably always will. But love isn't always enough to overcome fundamental incompatibilities." As the afternoon light began to fade, the reality of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Tomorrow, the world would wake up to news that would shake the British monarchy to its foundations. Newspapers would scramble to understand how the future king could walk away from his destiny. Royal commentators would analyze every public appearance, looking for signs they had missed. "The Queen knows?" Harry asked. "She was the first person we told," William confirmed. "She's heartbroken, but she understands. She said something that I'll never forget. A crown is meaningless if the person wearing it has lost their soul trying to earn it." Harry smiled sadly. That sounds like her. Always finding wisdom in impossible situations. The fire crackled in the grate, its warmth a stark contrast to the coldness of the situation they were discussing. Outside, the first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky, and soon the palace staff would begin their evening routines. "There's something else," William said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The children don't know yet. We're telling them tonight, after dinner. We wanted to wait until after I spoke with you." This revelation hit Harry hardest of all. He thought about his nephew and nieces, about how they would process this information, about how their lives would change overnight. George, who was just beginning to understand his place in the line of succession, would suddenly find himself much further from the throne. Charlotte and Louis, still so young, would have to navigate the complex emotions of their parents' separation while dealing with the public nature of their family's dissolution. "I'll help however I can," Harry said finally. "With the children, with the transition, with whatever you need." "I know you will," William replied. "That's why I know the monarchy will survive this. Because you'll bring something to it that I never could. The ability to adapt, to change, to find new ways of doing things." As they prepared to leave the study and face the evening ahead, the three of them stood together in the doorway. Tomorrow would bring chaos, scrutiny, and endless questions. But tonight, they were still a family, still bound by love and shared history, even as they faced the end of everything they had known. The last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the castle walls, and the ancient building settled into its evening rhythms. In just a few hours, William and Kate would sit their children down for the most difficult conversation of their lives. But, for now, they allowed themselves this moment of quiet before the storm, holding on to each other and the memories of better times that would have to sustain them through the difficult days ahead. Dinner that evening felt like a surreal performance. The family dining room, usually filled with laughter and the children's animated conversations about their school days, seemed unnaturally quiet. George, Charlotte, and Louis sensed something was different, picking at their food while stealing glances at their parents. Kate had prepared their favorite meal, shepherd's pie with extra cheese, just the way Charlotte liked it, and the homemade bread rolls that Louis always helped her make. But tonight, even these small comforts couldn't mask the tension that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. "Mummy, are you feeling sick?" Charlotte asked, her 7-year-old intuition picking up on her mother's unusual quietness. "You look sad." Kate forced a smile, the same practiced expression she had perfected for hundreds of public appearances. But this time, it felt different. This time, she was performing for her own children, and The weight of that deception was almost unbearable. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Kate replied, though her voice caught slightly on the words. "Daddy, and I just need to talk to you all about something important after dinner." George, already showing signs of the serious nature he had inherited from his father, put down his fork. "Is it about why you and Papa were crying yesterday?" The question hung in the air, innocent and direct in the way that only children can manage. William and Kate exchanged a look across the table, both realizing that their 8-year-old son was more perceptive than they had given him credit for. "Yes," William said simply. "It's about that." Louis, only 5 and still more interested in arranging his peas into patterns on his plate than in adult conversations, looked up suddenly. "Are we in trouble? Did we do something wrong?" "No, my love," Kate said quickly, reaching over to touch his small hand. "You haven't done anything wrong. None of you have. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that have nothing to do with their children." After dinner, they moved to the family sitting room. Not the formal drawing room where they received official visitors, but the cozy space filled with the children's artwork, family photographs, and comfortable furniture that showed signs of daily use. This was where they had Christmas morning, where they watched movies together on Sunday afternoons, where they had lived their most normal family moments. The children arranged themselves on the large sofa, George in the middle with his arms protectively around his younger siblings. It was a gesture that reminded William painfully of himself and Harry at similar ages, trying to understand adult problems that seemed too big for their small worlds. Kate sat on the edge of the coffee table, facing her children, while William took the armchair across from them. The physical distance felt symbolic of the emotional chasm that had grown between them, but both parents focused entirely on the 3 faces looking up at them with curiosity and growing concern. "You know how much Daddy and I love you," Kate began, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "That will never, ever change. No matter what happens, no matter where we live or what decisions we make, you are the most important things in our world." George's expression grew more serious. "Are you getting divorced?" he asked, the word coming out carefully, as if he wasn't entirely sure of its meaning but understood its gravity. The directness of the question took both parents by surprise. William cleared his throat, struggling to find words that could explain the unexplainable to children who deserved honesty, but also protection from adult complexities. "Yes," William said finally. "Mummy and I are going to live in different houses. We'll both still see you all the time, and we'll still do family things together, but we won't be married anymore." Charlotte began to cry, not the dramatic tears of a childhood injury, but quiet, confused tears that broke Kate's heart more than any screaming tantrum could have. "But why?" she whispered. "Don't you love each other anymore?" Kate moved to the sofa, gathering Charlotte into her arms while trying to maintain eye contact with all 3 children. "We do love each other, sweetheart. Sometimes love isn't enough to solve every problem." "Is it because of the royal stuff?" George asked, his question demonstrating a maturity that seemed far beyond his 8 years. "Is it because everyone always wants to take pictures of us, and we can't do normal things?" The perceptiveness of his question stunned both parents into momentary silence. They had tried so hard to shield their children from the pressures of royal life. But, clearly, George had been absorbing more than they realized. "That's part of it," William admitted. "The royal responsibilities make everything more complicated. They make it harder for families to stay together sometimes." Louis, who had been listening with the intense concentration that children bring to things they don't fully understand, suddenly spoke up. "Will I still be a prince?" The question revealed so much about how these children understood their identity. They weren't just George, Charlotte, and Louis. They were Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis. Their titles were as much a part of them as their names. "Yes," William said. "You'll always be princes and a princess. But the way our family works might change a little bit." What he didn't tell them, what they would learn gradually in the coming months, was that their father's abdication would fundamentally alter their places in the line of succession. George, who had been destined to be king, would now be much further from the throne. In some ways, this was the greatest gift his parents could give him, though it would take years for him to understand it. Charlotte looked up at her mother with red-rimmed eyes. "Where will you live, Mummy?" "I'll be at Anmer Hall," Kate replied, referring to their country home in Norfolk, where they had spent many of their happiest family moments. "And Daddy will stay at Clarence House in London. You'll spend time with both of us, in both places." "Can we bring Orla?" Louis asked, thinking of their beloved Cocker Spaniel. Despite everything, Kate smiled at this, the first genuine smile she had managed all day. Of course we can bring Orla. She'll travel back and forth with you. The conversation continued for another hour, filled with the practical questions that children ask and the careful reassurances that parents provide. They talked about schools. The children would stay at their current schools to maintain stability. They discussed holidays. Christmas and birthdays would still be family affairs, just arranged differently. They covered bedtime routines, weekend activities, and all the small details that make up a child's sense of security. But underneath these practical discussions was a deeper emotional current. The children were processing not just the end of their parents' marriage, but the end of life as they had known it. They were grappling with concepts of adult love, duty, sacrifice, and compromise that most children never have to consider. George, ever the serious older brother, asked the question that cut to the heart of everything. If you're not going to be king anymore, Papa, does that mean Uncle Harry will be? William nodded. Yes, it does. Uncle Harry and Aunt Megan will have to take on more responsibilities now. Will they come back to live in England? Charlotte asked. We're still figuring all of that out, William replied. There will be lots of changes for everyone. As the evening wore on and the children's questions gradually decreased, Kate began the familiar routine of bedtime. Bath time, story time, prayers, and good-night kisses. All the normal rhythms that would somehow have to continue in this new abnormal world they were creating. When the children were finally settled, William and Kate found themselves alone in the family sitting room, surrounded by the detritus of their conversation, tissues, half-finished cups of tea, and the weight of 3 broken hearts. They handled it better than I expected, Kate said, though her voice was hollow. George understands more than he's letting on, William replied. And Charlotte is going to need extra attention. She takes everything so personally. And Louis will probably be fine as long as his routine doesn't change too much, Kate added. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts about the conversation they had just had and all the conversations that would follow. Tomorrow, the world would know their secret. But tonight, their primary concern was the 3 children sleeping upstairs, whose lives had just been fundamentally altered by adult decisions beyond their control. I keep thinking about our wedding, Kate said suddenly. About the vows we made. About how certain we were that love would be enough to overcome anything. William looked at her across the room, seeing not the polished duchess the public knew, but the young woman he had fallen in love with at university. Maybe love was enough, he said quietly. Maybe this is what love looks like when it has to choose between holding on and letting go. Outside, the night was quiet and still, the ancient walls of Windsor Castle holding their secrets as they had for centuries. But tomorrow, everything would change, and the world would wake up to a story that would challenge everything people thought they knew about love, duty, and the price of a crown. The morning of the announcement arrived gray and drizzly, as if the English weather itself was mourning what was about to unfold. William stood in his private office at Kensington Palace, watching the rain streak down the windows while his private secretary made final preparations for what would be the most significant royal announcement in modern history. The official statement had been crafted and recrafted dozens of times, each word weighed for its potential impact on public opinion, constitutional law, and the future of the monarchy. Legal experts had been consulted, constitutional scholars had provided guidance, and even the Prime Minister had been briefed on the unprecedented nature of what was about to be revealed. Kate was at Anmer Hall with the children, having left London before dawn to avoid the media storm that would inevitably follow. They had agreed that she should be somewhere private when the news broke, somewhere the children could process the public reaction without being directly exposed to it. At exactly 10 o'clock, the statement was released simultaneously to all major news outlets, to the court circular, and to the royal family's official social media accounts. The words were simple and formal, but their impact would reverberate around the world. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales has informed Her Majesty the Queen of his decision to renounce his claim to the throne. This decision has been made after careful consideration of personal circumstances affecting his family. His Royal Highness will continue his charitable work as a private citizen. The Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cambridge have also decided to separate. Their primary concern remains the well-being of their 3 children. Within minutes, news feeds across the globe were dominated by breaking news alerts. Television programs were interrupted, special editions of newspapers were rushed to print, and social media exploded with reactions ranging from shock to disbelief to sympathy. In the CNN newsroom in London, Veteran royal correspondent Sarah Bennett struggled to maintain her professional composure as she reported live to millions of viewers worldwide. "This is unprecedented in modern royal history," she said, her voice slightly shaking. "We're witnessing the voluntary abdication of a future king, something that hasn't happened since Edward VIII in 1936, and even that situation was fundamentally different." The BBC interrupted regular programming to provide continuous coverage, with experts and constitutional lawyers attempting to explain the implications of William's decision. Buckingham Palace's phone lines were overwhelmed with calls from journalists seeking additional comments. While crowds began to gather outside the palace gates, many people looking confused and upset. At Amber Hall, Kate had turned off the television after watching the first few minutes of coverage. The children were at school, unaware that their family's most private struggles were now public knowledge. She walked through the house they had loathed as their private retreat, touching familiar objects and remembering happier times. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and family members who had seen the news. Her sister Pippa had driven up from London and was sitting with her in the kitchen, providing silent support while Kate processed the reality of what they had just done. "No regrets?" Pippa asked gently. Kate considered the question seriously. "About the decision?" "No. About how public it had to become." "Yes. I hate that the children will have to read about this in history books someday." Meanwhile, at Clarence's house, Harry and Meghan were meeting with senior royal advisors about the practical implications of Harry's sudden change in status. Overnight, he had gone from being the spare heir to the direct heir to the throne. Constitutional experts were explaining the process of succession, the legal requirements, and the ceremonial obligations he would need to fulfill. "This feels surreal," Harry confided to Meghan during a brief break in the meetings. "Yesterday, I was the brother who escaped. Today, I'm the future king." Meghan, who had her own complicated history with royal duties, squeezed his hand supportively. "We'll figure it out. We did it once before, we can do it again. But this time, we'll do it our way." The international reaction was swift and varied. In Australia, where William and Kate had been particularly popular, Prime Minister's office issued a statement expressing respect for their decision while affirming Australia's continued commitment to the Commonwealth. In Canada, similar sentiments were expressed, though constitutional experts began immediate discussions about what this meant for William's role as future head of the Commonwealth. American media was fascinated by what they termed the ultimate sacrifice for love, drawing parallels to Edward VIII's abdication for Wallis Simpson. Talk shows dedicated entire episodes to analyzing the decision, with royal biographers and relationship experts offering their interpretations of what had driven the couple apart. But perhaps the most poignant reactions came from ordinary people who had followed William and Kate's relationship from its university beginnings to its fairy tale wedding and through the years of what had seemed like a perfect royal marriage. Social media was filled with messages of support, disappointment, and sadness from people who felt personally invested in their love story. A teacher in Manchester posted on Facebook, "I showed my class their wedding video every year when we studied modern British history. Those children believed in their love story. How do I explain this to them?" A retired couple in Scotland who had driven to London for the royal wedding wrote on Twitter, "We stood in the rain for 12 hours to see them exchange vows. We believed they were different, that they would make it work. Our hearts are broken for them, and for us." By afternoon, crowds had gathered outside both Clarence's house and the gates of Amber Hall. Most were curious onlookers, but many brought flowers, cards, and messages of support. The police had to establish barriers to keep the gatherings peaceful and to protect the family's privacy. At Amber Hall, Kate watched from an upstairs window as people laid bouquets against the gates. Many of the messages were addressed to the children, expressing support and understanding. Some were addressed to her personally, thanking her for her years of service and wishing her well in whatever came next. One card, written in a child's handwriting, simply said, "Dear Princess Kate, I'm sorry you're sad. Love from Emma, age 7. Kate found herself crying over that card more than any of the formal statements from world leaders. The children came home from school subdued and confused. Their teachers had done their best to shield them from the news, but it was impossible to completely insulate them from the reality that their family had become the biggest story in the world. George, in particular, struggled with the public nature of their private pain. Why does everyone need to know? He asked Kate that evening. Why can't grown-up problems stay private? It was a question that Kate couldn't fully answer, except to say that being royal meant that personal choices became public property, and that this was one of the reasons why their father had made the decision he did. That night, after the children were in bed, Kate sat alone in the family room and read through hundreds of messages that had been forwarded to her from the palace. Many were critical, questioning her commitment to duty and her loyalty to the crown. But many more were supportive, expressing understanding and admiration for a difficult choice. One message, from a woman in Yorkshire, particularly moved her. "I stayed in an unhappy marriage for 20 years because I thought that was what good mothers did. My children suffered more from watching us pretend than they would have from us being honestly apart. You're showing your children that love sometimes means having the courage to let go." Meanwhile, in London, William was having his own difficult evening. He had met with his father, King Charles, for what both men knew would be one of their last conversations as heir and future king. Charles, who had waited his entire life to become king and had always assumed William would follow in his footsteps, struggled to understand his son's decision. "I've given my whole life to preparing you for this role," Charles said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Everything I've done has been about securing the succession, about preparing you and your children to serve the nation. And now Harry and his children will serve instead," William replied quietly. "The succession continues. The monarchy survives. It just takes a different path than we planned." "But at what cost?" Charles asked. "You're destroying your marriage, confusing your children, and throwing the institution into chaos." William looked at his father across the desk in the study where they had had so many conversations about duty, service, and sacrifice. "Dad, I've watched you struggle your entire life with the balance between personal happiness and royal duty. I've seen what it cost you, what it cost Mom, what it cost Harry and me. I won't put my children through that if there's another way." The conversation ended without resolution, both men understanding that they saw the situation from fundamentally different perspectives. For Charles, duty to the crown was paramount. For William, duty to his family had taken precedence. As the day ended and the news cycle began to shift to analysis and speculation about what would come next, the reality of their decision began to settle over everyone involved. There would be legal proceedings to formalize the abdication, custody arrangements to negotiate, and practical decisions about how to rebuild their lives outside the royal framework. But, for now, in the quiet after the storm of the announcement, both William and Kate found themselves alone with the consequences of their choice, wondering if they had made the right decision and knowing that there was no way back from where they had brought their family. 6 months after the announcement that shocked the world, the dust had begun to settle on what historians would later call the Windsor Revolution. The formal abdication papers had been signed in a private ceremony attended only by the Queen, Charles, Harry, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. William was no longer His Royal Highness. He had become simply William Mountbatten-Windsor, private citizen. The transformation had not been easy. The public had wrestled with their feelings about the decision, polling showing the country almost evenly split between those who supported William's choice and those who felt betrayed by his abandonment of duty. But, gradually, a grudging respect had emerged for a man who had chosen love and family over power and privilege. Kate had moved permanently to Anmer Hall, transforming it from a weekend retreat into a proper family home. The children had adjusted better than anyone expected to their new routine of spending weekdays with their mother in Norfolk and weekends with their father in London. The constant presence of protection officers remained, but their profile had been significantly reduced. William had found an unexpected peace in his new life. He had taken a position with a conservation organization, work that felt meaningful in a way that ribbon-cutting ceremonies never had. He lived in a modest flat in Kensington, close enough to see his children regularly, but far enough from the royal palaces to feel like a different person. On a crisp autumn morning, he stood in the playground at Charlotte's school, watching his daughter score a goal in her first football match. The other parents treated him with a careful politeness, still unsure how to relate to a former future king who was now just another divorced dad on the sidelines. "She's got your competitive spirit," said a familiar voice beside him. William turned to see Kate approaching, having driven over from Anmer Hall to watch the match. They had maintained a careful friendship in the months since their separation, putting the children's needs above any lingering hurt or disappointment. "And your coordination," William replied, smiling as Charlotte celebrated with her teammates. "Remember when you beat me at tennis on our second date?" Kate laughed, a sound that still had the power to make William's heart skip, even now. "You let me win that match, and we both know it." They stood together watching their daughter, two people who had loved each other deeply and who still carried traces of that love despite everything that had happened. The easy familiarity between them was still there, but so was the careful distance they maintained to protect themselves from the pain of what they had lost. "How are you doing?" "Really?" Kate asked as Charlotte's team celebrated their victory. William considered the question seriously. "Better than I expected, honestly. Different than I planned, but better. The work I'm doing feels real in a way that royal duties never did. And the children seem happy." "They are," Kate confirmed. "George told me last week that he's glad he doesn't have to worry about being king anymore. He wants to be a pilot, like you were." "And Charlotte?" "Still dreams of being a princess. But now she means the Disney kind, not the real kind," Kate said with a smile. "Louis just wants to play football and doesn't think about any of it." They watched as the children ran toward them, still buzzing with excitement from the match. Charlotte threw herself into her father's arms while George and Louis flanked their mother. For a moment, they looked like any normal family celebrating a school sports day. "Ice cream," William suggested, and the children cheered their approval. They walked together to a small cafe near the school, the children chattering about the match while William and Kate followed behind. Occasionally, people recognized them and stared, but the intense media attention had faded as other stories captured the public's attention. At the cafe, they squeezed around a small table, the children arguing good-naturedly about toppings while William and Kate shared the comfortable silence of two people who had known each other for more than 20 years. "I saw the interview Harry did last week," Kate said quietly while the children were distracted. "He seems to be finding his footing with the new responsibilities." William nodded. "It's strange watching him prepare for something I thought would be mine. But he's approaching it differently than I would have. More modern, more flexible. Maybe that's what the monarchy needs." "Any regrets?" Kate asked, echoing the question Pippa had posed months earlier. William looked at his children, covered in ice cream, and completely absorbed in their own conversation about football tactics and playground politics. "About choosing them over the crown? Never. About how it affected you. Every day." Kate reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "We both made choices, William. I could have tried harder to make it work within the system. I could have been more patient, more understanding about the pressures you were under. You shouldn't have had to sacrifice more than you already did," William said. "You gave up your career, your privacy, your freedom to be yourself. I couldn't ask you to give up your happiness too." Charlotte looked up from her ice cream, noticing the serious tone of her parents' conversation. "Are you talking about grown-up things again?" she asked. "Always," Kate said, ruffling her daughter's hair. "That's what grown-ups do. We talk about complicated things and try to make good decisions." "Will you ever live in the same house again?" Louis asked with the blunt curiosity of a 5-year-old. The question hung in the air for a moment. It was something all three children had asked in various ways over the past months, and something both William and Kate had wondered about themselves. "No, sweetheart," Kate said gently. "Mummy and Daddy are happier living in different houses. But we'll always be your parents, and we'll always be friends." George, ever the serious older brother, nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. Like Uncle Harry and Aunt Megan were happier living in America, but they're still family. "Exactly like that," William said, struck by his son's wisdom. As the afternoon wore on, they walked back to the school parking lot where their separate cars waited. The children hugged their father goodbye, making plans for their weekend visit to London. The easy affection between them was a testament to how well they had managed the transition, despite all the challenges. William and Kate stood by their cars for a moment, neither quite ready to end this unexpectedly pleasant afternoon together. "Thank you," Kate said suddenly. "For what?" "For making the hard choice. For putting the children first. For giving up something you were born to do so that we could all have a chance at happiness." William looked at her, seeing not the Duchess of Cambridge she had been, but Kate Middleton, the woman he had fallen in love with in a university hallway all those years ago. "I think," he said carefully, "that maybe we both got something out of this that we didn't expect. I got to discover who I am when I'm not defined by a future crown. And you got to remember who you were before you became a royal wife and mother." Kate smiled, tears pricking at her eyes. "We did love each other well, didn't we? Even if we couldn't make it work forever. We loved each other perfectly," William agreed. "Right up until the moment when love meant letting go." They parted that day with a hug that felt like closure, like the final page of a story that had captivated the world. The great love affair of William and Kate was over, but something else had taken its place, a friendship built on shared history, mutual respect, and the love they both had for their children. As William drove back to London, he thought about the letter he had received that morning from a young man at university who had written to thank him for showing that it was possible to choose love over duty, family over tradition. The letter had reminded William that his decision, painful as it had been, might serve as an example for others facing similar impossible choices. Kate, driving back to Norfolk, thought about the conversation she'd had with Charlotte the night before. Her daughter had asked if she missed being a princess, and Kate had realized that she didn't. She missed the purpose that royal work had given her, but she had found new purpose in her children's happiness and in her own rediscovered sense of self. That evening, both William and Kate tucked their children into bed in their respective homes, listening to prayers that included wishes for happiness, family, and the simple hope that tomorrow would be a good day. The children had adapted to their new normal with the resilience that children possess, and perhaps they were better for having seen their parents choose courage over convenience. In the months and years that would follow, the story of William and Kate's great sacrifice would be told and retold, analyzed and mythologized. Some would see it as a cautionary tale about the price of putting personal happiness above duty. Others would see it as a love story that transcended traditional endings, a story about two people who loved each other enough to set each other free. But perhaps the truest measure of their choice was not found in history books or royal biographies, but in the laughter of their children, who grew up knowing that they were loved enough to be chosen over a crown, cherished enough to be worth any sacrifice, and valued enough to inspire their parents to rewrite the rules of an ancient institution. The last goodbye had been painful, but it had also been the first hello to a different kind of happiness, one that neither William nor Kate could have imagined when they were young and certain that love could conquer anything. Sometimes, they had learned, love conquers everything precisely by knowing when to surrender, when to choose freedom over forever, and when to transform an ending into a new beginning.